r/AskReddit. Historians of Reddit. What is the funniest, most ridiculous story from history that you know of? The Roman Emperor Valentinian died by self-induced brain aneurysm triggered when he screamed his head off at representatives from a confederation of German tribes that refused to make promises of peace. His death is my favorite imperial death in Roman history. Imagine being the German dudes. Some guy, who you're there to negotiate with, just raged so hard he died. Does that mean you win by default? War in the 6th century was usually a fairly brutal affair. When a city was captured, its people were often enslaved or killed. So when, during the Byzantine-Sasanian Wars, Khosrow I of Persia successfully besieged Antioch, its inhabitants were understandably somewhat nervous. However, rather than enslaving them or killing them, Khosrow brought the city's population in its entirety back to Persia and rebuilt them an almost exact replica of Antioch, down to the layout of the city and rooms in the houses. The people were freed and made into full Persian citizens. The city was named Antioch Khosrow. Khosrow's better Antioch, and he took great pride in ensuring that it saw greater prosperity than the Byzantine version. When the composer Rachmaninoff wanted to befriend Stravinsky, also a composer, Rachmaninoff remembered Stravinsky casually mentioning as a part of a story that he enjoyed honey. Rachmaninoff showed up at his door at the middle of the night with a gigantic jar of honey. There was a War of the Bucket in 1325 between two city-states Bologna and Modena. The Modenese soldiers stole a bucket from a Bologna city well and sparked a war in which around 2,000 people died. The Modenese eventually won and they still have the bucket on display, still to this day. Elmer McCurdy. He was a really inept train robber. He once tried to blow up a safe to get to some silver coins, and ended up melting the safe and the coins. Another time, he tried to rob a train, but all they were able to get was some whiskey and like $15 from the conductor. After that, he holed up at a farm, drank all the whiskey, and got into a shootout with the sheriff, and died in 1911. But that's not the end of the story. They took him to the funeral home, and he was embalmed with a lot of arsenic because they thought it'd be a while before someone claimed the body. And they were right, because no one came to claim him. And the funeral director was like, I am making money off this guy, and put him on display as the Oklahoman outlaw and charged money to see him. You put the money in his mouth. The funeral director's kids used to put Elmer on roller skates and scare other children with him. Eventually, these two dudes came over and were like, oh, our poor brother Elmer. We must take him home. They were not his brother. They were sideshow operators. Elmer was on the circuit now. He went places. He was sold a few more times. Ended up in a museum. And they rented him out. He was in a movie theater lobby as a hophead who tried to hold up a store and was shot, in order to promote an anti-drug film. But it's been decades, and he's starting to look a little rough. All desiccated and missing a couple of fingers and his hair. They rent him out to a display at Niagara Falls, and they send him back because they think he's a really creepy waxwork. Yet, it's been so long. No one remembers he's a real dead guy. He gets sold to the Pike, this run-down pier amusement park in Long Beach, California. He's hung up in Laugh in the Dark, their ghost funhouse ride. The Pike is a terrible park, but it's cheap to film at. In December 1976, they are filming an episode of The $6 Million Man, and they are in Laugh in the Dark. moving stuff around, and they move this painted neon orange dummy, and its arm breaks off, and it's a real arm, and it's a real dead guy, naked, painted orange, incredibly mummified. He's eventually taken to the coroner, eventually identified, and then eventually buried in Boot Hill in Oklahoma, under concrete, so he can't go wandering again. How about the trial of Pope Formosus, who was dead? Yes, that's right. The time they dug up the corpse of a former pope up on trial. I'm not a historian, so I'll just summarize. Formosus becomes pope in 891 CE, and in those days, as with most of history, the papacy is just a way to important families to exert control over each other. He dies in 896 and people start rioting, so they get a new guy in ASAP. Boniface IV, who dies from gout after 15 days. Only for Stephen VI to step in, whose surprise is backed by the faction that was rival to Formosus. Stephen VI then digs up the body of Formosus and promptly finds him guilty of a bunch of things. They cut off 3 of his fingers, used for blessings, invalidate most things he did as pope, strip him of his fancy robes and bury him in a commoner's grave. Then, later, Stephen VI is still mad, so they digged him up again, only this time they just tie weights to the body and chuck it in the river. Luckily a monk manages to drag it out later. But wait, there's more. Well, it turns out chucking former popes in the Tiber doesn't go over well in Rome, so the people rioted again and tossed Stephen VI in jail, and by 897 he's been strangled to death in his prison cell. But hold up, because in 897/98 the next 2 popes, yes, 2, have new trials that reverses all the stuff Stephen VI tried to pull, and more importantly also makes the rule of no more digging up people for trials, which was a pretty good move until in 904 when Sergius III overturns the rulings of the last 2 guys, and he promptly finds Formosus guilty again. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more Reddit content.